I ask you, how can you possibly reconcile the principles of a free society when you live in a society in which the government's got the omnipotent power to torture, rendition, kidnap, detain indefinitely, deny trials, and even assassinate people in that jurisdiction? That's the threat of the warfare state. Over here, you've got the threat of the welfare state. The seeds for this socialist system were planted at the turn of the 20th century when the so-called progressives were importing their socialist ideas primarily from the German socialists. The big revolution, of course, came in the Franklin Roosevelt administration when the primary purpose of government became to take money from those who were producing it in order to give it to those who did not produce it. But the big jugular vein for this thing, the twin jugular vein for the welfare state as well as the warfare state, came in the 1910s. For that was when they instituted this twin jugular vein of the income tax and the Federal Reserve System, through which the nurture, the food, the money would be funneled through to fund what is about to come. The socialistic welfare state and, of course, the warfare state. They've got the most brutal, the most vicious agency, or at least one of them, enforcing this income tax, the Internal Revenue Service. You know, it's kind of amusing when they were talking about that guy that flew his plane into the building there in Austin, the IRS building. The statists, both liberals and conservatives, were talking about, you know, how angry he was and how frustrated he was, and they were sort of mocking him and so forth. Not one single statist wrote any article on what it is, the horrific things that this vicious agency does to people that drives them into doing a murder-suicide. And it's not the first time. There's countless people that have committed suicide because of the liens, the harassments, the audits, the endless letters, the visitations at workplaces, the haranguing of the children, the garnishments, all without judicial process. Because you see, the statists can't stand the thought of questioning this agency. This is their lifeblood. This is what funds their machine, their deity. They consider it heretical. You see, everything the IRS does is considered normal and rational and reasonable. We're not supposed to question that. You see, here's how the whole process works. Everybody is over here paying their income taxes all year long. You know, whether it's employer or estimated taxes, and April 15th, we're making up the difference soon. But what's happening is you've got this gigantic fund of money that's being funneled through this jugular vein into Washington. Now, this is a dream come true for a statist. I mean, he's got this gigantic pool of cash ready to distribute in largesse to, you know, all the fat cat bureaucrats that are walking around, and the military officials with all their medals, and everybody trying to get their part of the welfare and the warfare. And then, of course, stuffing money in the pockets of the politicians that are distributing this money. It's a statist dream come true. It's like free money, free largesse, grants for your community. And you see, it becomes a gigantic grab fest where everybody, the dependency class, the parasitic class, is over there trying to get their dirty little hands on their share of the money. Let me have my share. No, let me have my share. No, that's my share. And they all get this sense that they're entitled to it. They're entitled to live off the fruits of other people's earnings. That's why they call it an entitlement. Because they honestly believe in their minds that they are entitled to your money. And they're fighting for it. They're grabbing for it. But you know what ends up happening? This dependency class starts getting larger and larger, and their wants become more and more voracious. I mean, you talk about greed. I mean, this is the greed class. And what happens is that they run out of money. They don't have enough money to satisfy the dependency class. And the liberal staters are saying, tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. But you see, they start figuring out that at some point you don't have any more rich to tax, that they start cratering in on themselves, as has happened in the welfare state in Greece. They say tax the middle class, but you see, they know that the middle class historically has sometimes had revolts and even revolutions over exorbitant taxes. So what they do is they go out and start borrowing the money. And they borrow and they borrow and they borrow to start passing out this largesse. Now let me digress a minute here to tell you about one aspect of these statists. Statists are fascinating people, you know. 40 years ago, they sent 40,000 people of my generation to their deaths, both liberals and conservatives, in this idiotic, stupid, immoral war in Southeast Asia. And they're still proud of it. Some of them still extol it and praise it and so forth, and they still praise and extol Lyndon Johnson, statist par excellence, Richard Nixon, statist par excellence. There's no shame. And notwithstanding the fact that it was all based on lies. I mean, you know, like they made up this attack at the place called the Gulf of Tonkin, and they said, we've been attacked, we've been attacked. And they knew there'd been no attack. But it was all designed to get a resolution to use force, no declaration of war as the Constitution requires. But a resolution to use force, that sounds kind of familiar, you know. That justified a war that went on and killed 58,000 American men. Well, the rationale they were using is because of communism. They were, communism's horrific. And they were right. I mean, communism is horrific. But they were saying the dominoes will fall, and if we don't sacrifice these men here, the communists will come to America, they'll take over the public schools, they'll teach socialism, it's as if anything different there, Got Americans teaching them there. You see, apparently communism's not so bad anymore. Because guess where they got the money to fund not only their welfare state, but also their little imperial enterprises in Iraq and Afghanistan? They went right to the Chinese communists and borrowed the money instead of taxing Americans, because they knew what would happen over here if they did that. This is the same communist regime that was funneling the arms and the weaponry that killed many of these 58,000 American men, and that's where they borrowed the money. I mean, how much more morally despicable can you get than that? And hypocritical. But that's a statist. Or unless perhaps you look at Cuba, where, that's a communist regime. Of course, it's a liberal's dream come true, because everybody's equal, equally destitute. And it's a conservative dream because they have military tribunals there and denial of due process and no criminal defense attorneys. But you see, apparently communism's not so bad there, even though they've got a 50-year embargo, hoping that someday they're going to succeed in ousting Fidel Castro from power. But you see, apparently communism is not so bad anymore, because every time somebody tries to escape from Cuban communist tyranny, these statists, both liberals and conservatives, attack them on the high seas under the name of immigration controls, and they forcibly repatriate them back into communist tyranny. That's a statist for you. Now, we all know what they're going to do with this debt. And by the way, each of you owe, on average, $40,000 right now in that your average part of that national debt. And it's growing every day. They've got a credit card that they're charging on your account, and it has no limit on it. They're running up the bills every day. They're spending just this year alone $1.4 trillion more than what they're bringing in taxes. That's your debt. A family of 4, you got 2 kids, $160,000. You owe it. Because you see, what's happening is the Chinese communists, they know what's going on with this other part of this jugular vein that came into existence in the 1910s. See, the average American, he has no idea. This is the brilliance of the Federal Reserve System. You ask an average American, there's a real reason why governments take control of educational systems. It's because they know the power to mold people's minds when they're children, and that mind remains molded all too often all through adulthood.